Welcome to House Education, April 9th. We are discussing this morning S227. So committee, I asked Ledge Counsel to meet or talk with the Attorney General's office to sort of incorporate some of those thoughts that Julio Thompson had. And so today's version, to a certain extent, incorporates those. I think probably best would be to turn it over to Legislative Counsel to walk through that.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's again, Rick Sagal with the Office of Legislative Counsel. As the chair indicated, let me take a step back. These changes, I watched the video of Julio Thompson the other day testifying for the committee. Took notes. I sent this to Julio, not heard back yet because it was late. Not his fault. It's my fault for getting it over to him late. But I believe these changes reflect his recommendations and kind of what the committee was initially agreeing to. And we can, of course, have the conversation if this makes sense or not. I've not had a chance to watch yesterday's testimony. And I don't know if there were suggestions from Wilmer from Windiski, if he had any suggestions for language. Haven't watched it yet.
So I think there were no suggestions for language changes. They're going to take a look at it just to get a better sense of what is policy and what is procedure, and to maybe sort of reorder things in that way. And they are not prepared to, they're tied up with other things. And so they'll probably revisit that next week.
Okay, great. Okay. I'll still watch it just so I have an understanding of what you all heard. So this is a strike all amendment. It's frankly easier because there's going to be several of these little small changes and you're going to have 9 or 10 instances of amendment, and that gets kind of hard to read. But what I've done is, you'll have to trust me a little bit, is I've basically taken the bill as it passed the Senate and I've highlighted where changes have been made. Nothing's hidden. It is a strike all, but I will certainly show you changes from the House version or from the Senate version.
Could you take a moment and explain strike all for this gentleman who's?
Yes. Well, so, you know,
I'm happy to as well, yeah.
yeah, maybe you're probably better versed at doing it.
Well, either way, I'll defer.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So there's two ways to amend a bill. It's either a strike all, which means it's a clean slate, brand new language, nothing is brought over, so to speak, from the original bill. There's also something called instances of amendment, which amends the underlying document. So they look different. You'll notice that most amendments are strike alls because they're easier to read. However, you have to be careful because strike all, you do want to make sure the changes reflect what the committee wants. My colleagues and we all highlight changes in strike alls. So in the instance of amendment, it'll say, for example, in section 1, the purpose statement, the words "for all children" are struck through and replaced by certain other words. That's how that would look. And a strike all is just, it looks like a regular amendment, if that makes sense.
It's for the body, but not the.
Well, so the instance of amendment would be just instance 1, this comma is removed. Instance 2, added in section 3. Instance 3, so it's basically taking the underlying bill that you have and saying we're amending it in these different ways.
Perfect. But with a strike all,
Yeah.
we're clearing the body,
Right.
keeping the intent.
Well, you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be. There's germaneness, which I won't speak to, but there's the bill can be restructured however you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'll see on the floor, you'll see it with our education bill, Ways and Means, we'll have like 8 instances of amendment rather than them doing a strike all. It's kind of a choice on what's the best procedure more than anything else. Yeah.
And I'll usually have a recommendation. In this case, I think it's easier because there are several fairly significant changes, and reading it in the scope of the bill, I think it's helpful. If you have an instance of amendment, you kind of have to go back. You're looking at 2 documents. You're saying, okay, this change, we'll need to find out what changed here. So there is usually a reason we do that. It's because it's just a few and it's not maybe a major change. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I don't. So page 1, there's no changes to the bill. Okay, page 2, no change to law enforcement officer definition. No change to non-public area of a school. I know there's been conversation about that, and I do want to take a moment here to kind of talk about what I'm thinking about. I tend to agree that this is not as specific as maybe you want it to be. Could a gym teacher indicate what he or she thinks is non-public? Potentially. So I'm thinking, I've talked to Beth about this as well, Beth St. James, who's here a lot, and we're going to maybe strategize on this a little bit. Ways to improve this, at least clarity, because you need to know what you're doing. You have policy decisions, but you need to know words do matter. And I plan on, not today, but bringing a different way of structuring this term a little bit. And leads me to number 3 as well, school. I think needs to be tweaked a little bit. I mean, there's one change here. 4 was replaced by within. That's highlighted in yellow. That was a Beth recommendation, because sometimes school staff are employed by the district, not by the school. That might be the norm. So in this case, you don't want to say working for the school, because would a teacher be employed by the school? Well, not necessarily, right? So I think we're going to maybe think about how to the term school might be the thing that we need to work on, just so you all know. And if you have ideas, certainly happy to hear them. So that's the first change, kind of a small but important change to the definition of school. Going down to the rest of page 2, no changes to B1 or 2 or 3. So all those superintendent fostering relationships with immigration advocacy, those aren't changed. Student records, this is something that Julio Thompson, I believe, brought up. And the question was,
I'm going to just interrupt for a second, because you just jogged a memory. When we did have superintendents in, there was some language changes that they proposed in terms of fostering to the extent possible. So when you go back and look at that testimony,
Okay.
think about incorporating that.
so was it just number 3, or were there requests to number 1 and 2 as well?
I think it was 3 is what jogged my memory. I have to pull it up real quick to see, but it's 3.
I will look at that when I get.
Then it's in a document.
Oh, okay, they provided testimony. Okay. Okay, I will take a look at that. In the meantime, subsection C, student records, the recommendation was the language as it passed the Senate. Read that schools are prohibited from using policies or procedures to engage in practices, but that didn't prevent actual engagement of. And I think Julio indicated that may be somewhat of a loophole. So now the language reads that you are prohibited from engaging in directly in these practices that have the purpose or effect, adding the phrase purpose or as well, and from using the policies or procedures to engage in. So that from using policies or procedures was in the underlying bill, but engaging in was not. And again, that's my understanding of what Julio was suggesting to the committee.
Quickly sort of following on our chair's recommendation to go look at VSA, they also suggested in this one to, and it's in the written document to them, they have specific things, but school district instead of
Right.
school. And that may reflect the earlier
Yes.
question about school as well. So I just wanted to remind
Can I
us all.
add into that? They actually recommended that state entity, and it's not just schools and school districts, but you'll look at it, but.
Okay. There was, I remember, I have that in a later portion of the bill, and maybe I,
We to do it, or
Right.
not just schools and school districts, but there'll be language.
You'll see.
so I think, yes, so the school definition,
Yeah.
Yeah.
this comes up a lot.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about how to word this differently. So there will be some type of change either to the definition, or do we need to use certain times? Do we need to say school districts and not schools? So that's something I'm thinking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, sure, of course.
But the problem is that I think it gets a little confusing as we talk about like schools as a physical place.
Right.
But really, I think when we talk about anything else, we probably need to say school districts because they're the entity.
Right.
So in this case, it should say school districts, sorry. School districts and state
Well, I have to look at the actual testimony, so I just have a note here I wrote, include state entities, schools is not the appropriate term, is what it said, but I just,
Julio
that
Thomas.
was from the
Yes.
superintendent.
Okay,
You have
or he had testimony about that in a different part of it.
I sent you a link to his
just a
testimony.
question,
Okay.
It says, as such, this committee should expand data provisions of this bill to include state entities where appropriate. Okay.
So so I guess my question there, be careful how much you're opening this up, right? This,
Right.
if you want to apply to school districts, that makes some sense, but to every state agency.
Yeah.
I would be cautious in what probably testimony from AOA and maybe other entities that would say, this bill isn't really specific to us, should it be included, you know?
too broad.
Yeah, just,
Yeah, well taken. So in this one, this is a school districts are prohibited. That have the purpose or effect of excluding a student from school, be from attending school. So it's for
Yeah.
excluding a student from school seems vague.
Mhm.
Sounds like you're,
Maybe. if you-
or I'm trying to be too detailed in my wordsmithing.
Well, the question I had when they said that is, I know this is specific to immigration, but is this vague? I mean, there are legitimate reasons to exclude, having policies that exclude students from school because of safety reasons.
Yes.
Because they've harassed, bullied, hazed,
right.
you know, so you don't want it to be so broad that, I mean, schools have to have policies
Students are.
to exclude students.
That's interesting.
You say
For other
without-
reasons.
That's an interesting point as I read it.
Without just cause or,
This is about
I
student
just-
records.
Right.
right, I
Well-
know, but the example that Representative Quimby is bringing up is that
I mean, this is-
just cause there are reasons to exclude students.
Yeah, but this is
But specific to
only about
records.
gathering data.
But the records, so, but do their student records, you know, I just don't want it to be so broad that it has an unintended consequence. Because we're
So I
going too far. into-
No, I agree with you. The way I read this, so the student records subheading, but you know, that's not really, it is part of the law, but it's not really directing anything. It's meant to be helpful, so you can read what, you know, what this paragraph's about. It's including, some of you may know, in our statutes, is implies but not limited to. So the way I read this is that a school will be prohibited from engaging in these various policies that have the purpose of excluding a student from school. I think we might want to rethink that and limit it, narrow it, because
Yeah.
you're right, sometimes you do want to exclude a student for behavioral issues or something, right? That's not the intent of the bill, but
So here's the, for example, we have very clear statutes and policies on students who bring weapons to school.
Right,
If a school, you know, board decides to expel a student for bringing a gun to school, I guess they're violating the law, but is that a policy that you're using to exclude that student from school?
it could be interpreted that way.
Yeah.
I don't think it's you know, a reasonable judge or jury is going to say, well, that's not what they meant, but we're thinking about, we should maybe get it right. And one way I'm thinking about it is the word including, we don't have to use that word. We can say just these are the things the schools can't, use to exclude. And I think this is the intent, right? The immigration, citizenship information, place of birth, like,
Right.
those are things you don't want to exclude students from.
Could you use the phrase schools are prohibited from using students' personal records to engage in, because that's different than their permanent record or the behavior record.
What if we, well, you could say, what if we just take out student records? We say student records, schools are prohibited from collecting or requesting information regarding citizenship, immigration status of a student or a family member,
Just direct.
as opposed to using that to exclude a student. It does seem a little,
it's really 1 and 2 that would be important
yeah.
Right.
part of it.
Yeah. Well, and then you can put it, yeah, we should say, and using any of that information to exclude a student.
Yeah, there's a way to phrase it.
Go ahead, Case.
And maybe we've already said this, but just taking school districts and then throwing it in front of 1 and 2. School districts are prohibited from collecting blah, blah, blah. School districts are prohibited from disclosing blah, blah, blah. Will that take care of that?
I guess the intent here seems to be practices that have the effect of excluding a student from a school building. But anyway,
I think
give it some thought.
Tighten it up.
I know what you all want. Yeah, I think
As long as we all stop talking.
If you had, this is the thing, like, I'm not all knowing, right? If is it Rep. Quimby? I'm sorry. Okay. If Vice Chair, if she had not said that, I may not have caught that. So this is very helpful. It's helpful to talk.
I didn't think about it for the superintendent's rent, like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. So yeah, I will rework this to where the intent is captured in the language. The other change in this section is the number 2. It was designating, changing that to disclosing. Agree with that recommendation from the AG, assistant AG. Okay, on to page 4. No changes to the rest of that subsection C. On to D, the law enforcement section. At the bottom of the page 4, the superintendent or designee shall not allow a law enforcement officer appearing on an immigration-related matter into a non-public area of a school unless the officer provides official identification and a judicial warrant that names a specific individual located within the school who is subject to a search or arrest. I know the assistant AG talked about how just it's like you want the warrant to be specific to a person who is in the school, not just some person that is not going to be in the building. Why would they come in, right? If they're not in the building. So I think this captures what he wants, but
I think one of his comments, and maybe I misinterpreted, and maybe this just isn't legally possible, but that the warrant also would need to be specific as to where.
so typically an arrest warrant's not going to say where. A search warrant may say where, but it also makes it be a person. A search warrant can be a person, place, a vehicle. And if it's a school, this school, then yeah. But if it's this person's home and the person's there, well, no, you're not going to be allowed in because this warrant is not specific to a person, it's their home.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Julio may disagree, but I think this gets what you want.
Yeah.
Or what he wants. And it fixed my grammatical mistake that I made. The other comment he made was in that next subsection that the previous language did not have the yellow highlights at all. So it was absent agent shall warrant, comma, no school shall. I understand that is broad, and so an officer could come with any warrant for anybody and enter the school, right, as it read. So this time it must be the warrant that we just referenced in subdivision 2 that references a person or a place, the school, to be searched. And actually just must be the individual, right? It's got to be individual subject to a search. Okay, no other changes to 3 or 4 or 5. Unless I missed something, I didn't.
It is section D.
Yep.
Made some comment about D3. I think maybe you did get to it, requiring access to an area. Okay, we just discussed that. About a stringent policy that we needed better language.
Yeah, that's the there's one more thing before we get to that one.
Okay, great.
So I'm in subsection E, the immigration agreements. So this is a little bit different, and this is up to you all to discuss what you think about this. The previous language just had one that, except as required by federal state law, no school shall enter into an agreement with a state, local, or federal government entity that furthers the enforcement of any immigration law. There was a sentence that was deleted that said only the superintendent shall be able to enter these agreements. And there was discussion about how the governor has, and I saw that and I was like, I don't think that was the intent. However, we want to make sure we get this right. So I have a proposal, and it adds something that was not in the original bill. So any agreement that's referenced in one, which limits the narrow, the world of this bill is just the types of agreements that are mentioned in one. So this would have to be an immigration agreement with a school, okay? Any of those agreements that purports to be required by federal or state law shall be subject to review and approval by the school superintendent after the superintendent has consulted with the office of the attorney general. That part's new. Before it was just superintendent would approve it, be the sole authority. And don't know what you all think about that.
Seems pretty good. Just under subdivision 1, it should say school district.
School district, okay. Would that cover independent schools?
Superintendent.
Right, so,
I mean, it's-
all right, so you may want to ask Beth about this. But ultimately, every student, whether they're an independent school or public school, are the responsibility of the LEA, the L, what's the L stand for? Local Education Agency. And so, yeah, so therefore, and it's a school district. So, all right, you bring up a very good point. So what happens if an independent school? So we do need to sort of loop in approved independent schools since we do that from the start.
It's that dual track language that's in a lot of our bills. It's like superintendent or head of, you know.
So I think this goes back to the definitions because we reference
Yes.
attendance
Yeah.
quite often.
Yes,
So I think we need to go back, and this will go back to the definitions, and we'll say includes, is it head of school?
Head of school.
Yeah.
There's,
So Beth is very aware of this bill,
Yeah.
and we've talked about it a lot, and there's some more to do. I think when we fix the definitions, there won't be much change to the text of the bill definitions. That's my hope.
and just for yours and Beth's scheduling time, this bill will probably sit idle all next week.
Okay, great. Okay, shall I continue? Any questions about that, E2 or E1? Except for the, school. Okay. So the applicability section, this is again, the Attorney General recommendation. So the previous language had the word, that's yellow, public agency was school, double check. Yeah, any school from complying. So the testimony was, what about AOE? What about school districts, right? So public agency in our statutes typically means any state entity or political subdivision of the state, which is a very, very broad definition. So I am more comfortable using public agency here because it's limited to this bill, that nothing's intended to prohibit any state entity from complying with federal law. I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. The second sentence, I'm more concerned about being narrow because here, and this is what Julio Thompson recommended, that's in one of our other laws, when it comes to policing, to the extent any school or school district policy or practice conflicts with the lawful requirements of, and this 1373, I know he talked to you about these two laws. These are information sharing, immigration information. The policy or practice is to the extent of such conflict abolished. I am not comfortable putting public agency there because I don't know if you want to abolish even though it's federal law. I just think it's in the other Vermont law where this is referenced, it's just law enforcement. It's not. So where you see school or school district, it says law enforcement. So that was that world of that bill. Here we're talking about schools. So I don't know what you all, if this is what you think works or not.
If we didn't have that sentence at all, what would the consequence be?
The concern of the AG is that if this is contested, which it could be, that he's more comfortable with that second sentence, that the intent here is not to be preempted or to conflict with federal law. The the intent is just to use our state 10th Amendment authority to regulate what happens in our state. It's kind of window dressing, but
But there's a sort of a protection
I judge
from a challenge.
right, the court would hopefully say that, okay, they're not trying to overstep their bounds, they're staying within federal law. I would trust him as to what he thinks is the best thing to do here. If you're comfortable with it, then I think this is one way to do it.
Okay. Makes sense.
I mean, he's the one that litigates the stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
He knows all the cases. I know some of them, but man, he's been doing this a long time, so. Okay, and then he's not responded, so he may have some comments about this. He may suggest something else. No change to the policy language, just adding a comma, just grammatical change there. And then I believe no other changes in the bill.
So, question. So on page 6, line 16, where it says, and it's again, like sort of our boilerplate language we always use, that this policy, if they don't adopt the model policy, has to be at least as stringent. And he did mention, what does that mean? Stringent in what way? And he may have a suggestion when it gets back to you. But it's like we always say that on you either adopt the model policy or you have one that's as stringent. But in this, it's like what's stringent in what way? So he may have some suggestions.
Protective, I mean, yeah, that I think
Protecting privacy and safety, consistent with.
be. Or, yeah.
Yeah, but it is pretty standard language.
It's standard language that we always use under
Yeah, I would-
model policies.
Pass that off, Beth, as well, perhaps.
I won't get.
All right, so just to I'll just remind us what we heard from Superintendent's Association, in addition to sort of like this should be somewhat reorganized to sort of clarify what's policy, what's procedure. They talked about the rewording the provision to the following and including it in a section that would not imply that the superintendent would provide all the services.
Mm.
That was in section 2B3. It sort of softens the language.
Yeah.
No to change schools to school district.
Where appropriate.
Part about the relationship with the legal advocacy organization, if it's something there. Is that where they said to the extent possible? They're worried about our small rural
Right.
areas
Yeah,
may not
exactly what
be
was.
able, I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
I know it's not very good either. There, but it was about,
Foster to the greatest extent possible, a
Yeah, I
relationship
think
with
that
a
was it.
Which is already very squishy. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. It's really, yeah.
All right, yeah, if you wouldn't just mind reading over that testimony.
relates to the VSA, you said?
Yeah, and I sent you a link, so
Thank you. Got it.
they're available. All right, committee, this bill, because we are waiting to get some more thoughts on policy versus procedure from BSA. They're tied up with watching everything else we're doing. So we'll probably hold on this bill till later next week. And of course, later next week, we will be on the floor going through 955. But anyway, that is about it on this. Rick, thank you very much for giving all of these things some good thought and sort of checking out the input that we've heard and reworking it. We'll look forward to the next version when you can get to it. All right, everybody. Let's see. Let's pull up the agenda. So we have a little bit of an issue tomorrow. I don't know if it's an issue. We currently have, because legislative council is just simply not available. We can't really work on the other two bills, which we could probably vote out in a matter of hours. But we can't really do it without lunch council with us. So we currently have nothing scheduled tomorrow after the floor. I have to be in appropriations after the floor to walk through 9:55, so that may be a while. What I don't know is what we could put in place for that period after the floor till lunch and testimony that you all may want to hear. It's obviously kind of a last minute thing. I don't think Matt's got anybody teed up.
Prisoner, if you guys want to keep going back to this bill.
Yeah, I think probably not, no need.
Right.
So I'm just throwing that out there for thoughts. I mean, we could just, just say, all right, everybody, use this time productively to catch up on our work. Make sure you're comfortable with the changes that we are making to the 3 bills from the Senate that we have in front of us. Also to sort of catch up on what the rest of the legislature is doing. Yeah. Emily?
That could be helpful.
Related to that, I guess I'm having a hard time keeping up because we're during the day with what's going on.
Yeah.
Over in Ways and Means, and that really feels important to me right now. And I don't know how we want to structure that or what's on their agenda because I haven't looked tomorrow. But that I really deeply believe this committee needs to be on top of what's happening.
So I don't know where they're at. So if they were to vote out that they're doing instances of amendment.
Yes.
I don't know that
They're voting at 9 a.m.
they're voting at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Oh.
So if that's the case,
Get over it.
we'll know what it has to come in here to be presented.
I know, but in
And
my own brain.
so maybe we can just sort of wonder if we can't get them in to have us start going over it with them.
That might be, for me, it might be nice to hear from them
Before, yeah.
next week.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful.
All right, Matt, why don't you just sort of send out a, hey, if you end up doing this, could somebody come in? I'd like to be here for it too, but I have to be in.
That's what I'm, or you could just look it over myself. and then-
They're changing. Are you both having?
Jenny, what?
The money stuff quite a bit.
Yeah.
I don't know about your presentation to approach, you might want to create and time that together.
That's what I was wondering.
Because they've changed already quite a bit.
Like the appropriations for the
Yes.
facilitators and whatnot?
Facilitators and things, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, so
all right,
it
well, I'm
may
not-
end up having to like just correct what you've already.
Yeah, I
It
think,
might be better if those are together or you wait until they're done,
That's
because
what I-
it's gonna, they're changing.
yeah, I think that they are not looking at voting it out. Anyway, I'll discuss that with the folks and make sure
Yeah.
they're aware of that. All right, well then, I'd call it TBD, but let's try.
Okay.
Get that info. And today's a little bit relaxed as well because we have breaks between short pieces of testimony. There's lots of postings on the Ways and Means website.
Yeah.
In terms of current versions and whatnot. That I was recommend people look through.
There's one other thing that occurred to me. I know Rep. Hunter was up in Senate Ed yesterday on absenteeism and how did that go?
Yeah.
Fine.
I had someone
Okay.
reach out to me with a question about that, which is in our list of consequences that schools could take based on chronic absenteeism is loss of, I know that expulsion is in there as a possibility, but is loss of credit in there, like for a class?
No,
So here's one-
it was expulsion even in there?
I thought it was.
Not as
No,
an
was it?
excused absence.
Okay.
No,
Um,
what we wrangled over was the word shall or may provide
Oh,
material.
for somebody suspended.
One of the questions that is coming up from me from people that are reaching out to me is if a student it's the problem of proficiency-based education, kind of conflicting with what does seat time matter in a proficiency-based system? So like if a student is chronically absent and misses a third half of their class, are you allowed to say you don't get credit for this class, or do you have to get credit if they can swing in pass one test.
Oh,
Sounds like
Nothing
that's
to do
a
with
school
that.
building to
That's
school
That's what
building.
I said.
Absolutely.
But is there any way to address this within a chronic absentee?
Well, I think-
No, it's nothing.
And I think
Not as
that,
long as we have a proficiency base.
Out of
think
our
that there are
league, it's also
two-
not our job.
Yeah.
right, and I think
We're
that
not
those
supposed
are
to
two different things there.
I don't think they're two different things.
Well, not talking about passing a class, but the idea of chronic absenteeism and not. There is the idea of loss of learning, but it's also what it takes away from the community. And that's kind of part of that bill too, that, you know, you've got 25% of your kids who are chronically absent. It affects the system. It affects, you know, the
Mhm.
whole community.
Mhm.
And that is a large part of that bill, I believe.
We're gonna get, I think, probably some very good testimony next week or the week after. There's some really good work happening through a grant at UVM on reducing absenteeism, this everyday counts, public health, education,
Yeah.
collaborative initiative, and they are doing some pilot work around the state. But I think just in terms of our understanding of the issue, the sort of like public health nature, not the minutia of like who's passing classes.
Right.
That's not our purview at all. But I think that it will be a really good discussion on further information. I don't know where it will go, but it should be informative or potential next steps.
Yeah, and so for everybody, because we're kind of moving into that, we can't pass out any H bills. These S bills seem pretty fast and easy. We're lining up testimony in here to just sort of talk about the state of various things, teacher shortage or not. What's the status of sort of the community schools efforts that we've done?
There's actually overlap to now this project.
Yeah, this chronic
around
absenteeism.
chronic absenteeism. So-
Any more on opt-out?
We aren't going to pass a bill, but we can have the
I'm just to
the conversation.
right, keep the process going.
Oh,
Like how I did that.
So anyway, I think it'd just be good to continue to understand the landscape out there. What's going on. So that'll be kind of the idea. It'll be, you know, frankly, very informative without us having something weighing over us other than bill at hand.
I would just like to say too, and you know, I alluded to this in something I wrote down, but I mean, chronic absenteeism is a big deal. And we have a lot of schools that are really struggling, and that's a big deal. And I mean, you know, I feel like we get into the weeds with bills, but you know, the state of education, we need some help, and I think that's a great idea to just start.
The state of parenting needs some help, perhaps.
Well, there's,
State of
you know,
society.
schools have had to take on so much. Yeah, schools have had to take on so much these last bunch of decades. You're right.
I think it'll be good testimony and just like looking at all compounding factors, what populations is higher in. I know they're doing work in several rural communities in the states.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it may lead to further questions and more testimony.
So that's kind of the plan as it stands today. So just good opportunity for us to learn. So the bills, the two ones I think we can probably pop out pretty easy, but I would just like, if anybody's got any questions or want to hear anything more, the NEK choice district being able to access pre-K in New Hampshire, which seems to have everybody who testified on board. This bill that we just had seems like everybody's on board. The library stuff, this is one of those ones where, we got a little bit of testimony, but the fact is the Senate put a lot of time into this, and they took a lot more testimony than we did. So I am resistant to making significant changes in it, unless we hear some testimony contrary to that. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wonder, and I, to be totally honest, need to take another look at the bill, but I always sort of wonder about, is it the role of the legislature to add clarifying language to statute when what's really going on with this is sort of a grant administration issue? So I think I have a bit of a philosophical sticky point there.
Yeah. So here is, if I were in charge of the world with that bill, I think I would probably, I think that there are some very library specific points in
Yes.
here that talk about things like creating a simple application or allowing the AOE to grant a chunk of money to the Department of Libraries to be sub-granted. The sort of like specific reference to volunteer mentoring program seems like it was, I don't know how one would answer the question on the floor as to why that was put in a library bill.
Mhm.
So it would be okay to take that out. I think at the advisory committee, adding a state librarian that needs statute. Getting input on the grant program and process. The very library specific stuff. As well as there are just other things that are being updated. Library Day.
Library Day is
digital-
exciting. I don't
digital or physical.
want to downplay my enthusiasm for that.
And I will follow up and agree with those comments, but the part where including public library schools and volunteer mentoring programs, that whole section. They already are included.
Yeah, I think if I were, again, I would, that it says cannabis sales tax revenue shall be used to support a mixed delivery system for after school and summer programming. Eligible recipients can be public, private, or nonprofit organizations. Then there's a comma that says including public schools and volunteer mentor programs. I probably just put the period there and leave off the list. But then it says,
After, wait, I want to make sure that you would put the period after organizations.
correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
But then it would continue with the agency may allocate a portion of funds annually. To the,
That's already in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that was
It's a May.
less sticky than the other one.
Yeah.
Why is the other one sticky? I'm more trying to understand.
Because public library schools and volunteer mentoring programs are included in public, private, or nonprofit organizations. Already, you don't need to call them out, otherwise we have to call out everybody.
That's what I was, once you start a list. Who's on
I
the list,
understand
who's not.
why they did it.
Yeah.
Because they felt like they weren't being notified, but that's, our job is to write plain statutes that can be followed, and adding that in is not.
well, and then we are calling out libraries with the next sentence.
Yes, we are.
Which say the agency may allocate a portion of funds annually.
I mean,
This is a library bill.
I guess I see it somewhat differently, especially like in rural areas that don't have a lot of community centers, but the library is where that kind of thing would take place. And that with sort of the connection between, what we're saying about community schools and what we're saying about mentoring in general, like how important that is to be something that is well funded with some of this funding. I don't see a problem with keeping it in, but I do hear what you're saying.
Yeah, you just, because, it originally said including public libraries and schools, but then because somebody said, well, I'd also like volunteer mentoring programs in there, they got added.
But I think that the
So
answer.
when do the next group of people come in and say, we want us called out as well?
I mean, I think the answer, if someone asked you not on the floor, would be because like, it's particularly in more rural areas, that's where that particular program would take place and make sure.
Could have all kinds of responses to that.
I don't have enough information to
Yeah.
actually be able to say that confidently.
Well, I mean, I think the broader point is they are eligible. It's a grant program administration issue, which it sounds like, we heard testimony yesterday, they're working through it. So I just,
Happy to hear that.
yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, that's what we want to happen, right? Like an issue was explored, they're taking steps to fix it.
I actually felt fairly comfortable with the response from.
The sponsor of the bill wrote to the vice chair, ranking member, to say that there was a lot of testimony taken from small libraries who had trouble with the grant application, contrary to what we're hearing. And I think a lot of it was that the application included a lot of the stuff that you find in 21C applications, which is pretty rigorous. So I think just sort of calling out that they have to have a simple application
Oh, I think
process is fine. So anyway, so other than those very small changes, it seems fine. And the testimony we've got is that despite what we heard from the agency, they didn't really have a problem with the bill itself.
Everybody seems amicable to what's in there.
Right, well, and does anybody have anything to say about the NEK bill? Childcare bill? Yeah, it's funny, while I've been in here, we talked about it, sort of on and off for 10 years. And, you know, never, frankly, it was always like, well, you know, to include private pre-K, and you can't really do that because we don't have an oversight mechanism for what goes on over there. Never really thought to kind of just narrow it down to what that is. That to me was an elegant solution.
So I'll speak to it since it's my neck of the woods. I'm actually from Essex County. Pass it, let's do it. And then my question was, you know, because I did have that question just because everybody else, the parent can choose a private provider or public school. Why was Linda in that question was answered very clearly, just because of the complications that arise, and there seems to be enough capacity in the public pre-Ks across the border for the students that need to go, so I'm okay with that.
That's the best part. They get 15 hours, not 10.
They get tuition, well, and why, they explain why it's done
All they
for
get,
streamlining, and so.
unless they apply for a waiver, all they get is
Right.
the same tuition that every other pre-K
Correct, so,
provider gets.
so the questions that I might have had about it, just because I didn't know a lot about this bill, were answered yesterday, and I'm all for it.
Vote tomorrow?
We,
have
again,
the ledge
we
council.
have the ledge council present to vote.
It's a negative.
Everything, vote tomorrow morning.
We could have Beth from when to when tomorrow?
Perfect.
Well,
it takes
1 to 1:15.
15 minutes to vote this one through?
Unfortunately, we had nothing scheduled before then.
Right.
So I don't necessarily want to,
Hang around.
well, I'm not going to say that, but interrupt if people come up with alternative legislative plans of serving other
We talked
committees.
about maybe meeting, getting waste meets.
That's right.
So,
So we will.
anyway, so 15
And
minutes.
then
Wow.
what I also don't want to do, from a scheduling point of view, is get these bills on the floor Thursday and Friday next week, because we will be really dealing with 9:55. So we know they're ready to roll. We'll just get them rolling when it works.
If they come out on the floor 2 weeks from now instead of next week, it's not, it's big.
One of the board members of the Vermont Youth VSO asked the NEK people that if we wanted to go up and see the tour they're doing for their schools to see how like mobile performing arts is working. I mean, that's something, I said no, because I was going to be here. But if we don't have something to do, that's something I guess that I could do. If anyone else wants to come too.
Do not let us forget about it as we work through scheduling. You know, this is an opportunity as we sort of, especially after next week, if 9:55 moves out. The other bills are very quick work. We've got some good testimony coming in, but probably the schedule would allow the flexibility for us to go out and observe the world if people got some ideas. So where have we been? We've been to the Berry